and provide members of the PCCB network with a platform to engage and collaborate on a regional and thematic basis and share their experience and best practices related to climate change capacity building. And last but not least, wrap up this PCCB series of events at the UNFCCC 2022 Regional Climate Weeks by exploring the topic in Latin America and the Caribbean, Africa, Asia Pacific, and MENA regions. I would just like to get this started, present your speakers in the panel today. We have from the MENA region, Kishan Kudai, Regional Coordinator and Team Leader from the United Nations Development Program, Regional Bureau for Arab States. We also have from Africa, Pemi Gassel, the Director of International Climate Change, Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment from the Republic of South Africa. And from Latin America, we have Dr. Fernanda Carvalho, the Global Policy Manager, Climate and Energy from WWF International. We have a really good set of panelists today, so I just want to go start with Kishan, and it's the same question for all of you three. What is the status quo of horizontal and vertical integrations of NDCs in the region, and the role of capacity building in this context? Please, Kishan, you have the floor.
Thanks so much. Pleasure to be here, and thanks for convening this important discussion. Well, I mean, for UNDP in the MENA region, the Middle East North Africa region, capacity development for developing and enhancing the NDCs has been a major priority the last couple of years. So across the region, we've had country grants for many of the countries in the region for enhancing the NDCs, specifically in a way that addresses these horizontal and vertical issues. So, for example, when it comes to the horizontal issues, a specific focus has been on convening country dialogues, local dialogues, cross-ministry dialogues, to address those cross-sectoral issues across various aspects of the development agenda. So to not have it be just a purely environmental discussion among the climate specialists and the environment ministries and that kind of cluster, but to really engage across the board. In some countries, that has involved actually engagement at the head of state level, the prime minister office, even at the national committees, for example, that involve several ministries across national committees. So a couple of specific examples on the horizontal integration front, very specific to the Middle East North Africa region, through our support for NDC enhancement. Specifically in countries where we've supported, such as in Lebanon, Iraq, Sudan, and Somalia, the NDC enhancement process, trying to develop capacities and work with the countries to make the connections between climate action, the vision set in NDCs for raising ambition on climate action, to specific issues of fragility and crisis. So taking climate action in a crisis context, in a context with a heavy displacement, local conflict, and various other forms of multidimensional crisis that has emerged the last couple of years, of course, and how to place more ambitious climate action and climate measures on mitigation and adaptation to make the synergy then with national crisis response plans, crisis response policies in these kind of tough settings in the Middle East North Africa region where there's been a multidimensional crises. So I think that's one of the key lessons. That was also a key focus for the MENA Climate Week that we partnered with FCC earlier this year. The first MENA Climate Week that came out as a strong topic is really making that connection between climate action and issues of fragility and crisis. On the vertical front, a very specific focus in many of the NDCs in the region is on highlighting measures for local action, subnational action. So a major focus in the MENA region on municipal, city-based climate action. So you see a number of measures across the NDCs in the region that are specifically targeting things like low-carbon cities. So designated very specific activities, measures, initiatives that are targeted in NDCs at the municipal level, city action on both adaptation and mitigation, actually. On adaptation as well, very much focusing in on the most climate vulnerable communities within the countries. So not left at the generic national adaptation priorities, but really trying to look at the most vulnerable, those most at risk, for example, from climate displacement, water scarcity, and trying to identify measures within the NDC that can really benefit the most vulnerable in the country. So a big focus on community resilience in many of the NDCs through that process. A big focus on the gender nexus as well was a specific priority for UNDP support to the NDC enhancement process. So many of the NDCs have also increased the ambition in trying to take climate action under the NDCs that really brings co-benefits for women's empowerment and gender equality. A kind of cross-cutting, I would say, their capacity need and focus in the process of enhancing the NDCs and now going towards implementation in particular is on climate finance. So a lot of capacity needs that have been identified in terms of expanding climate finance at the local level, at the country level actually. So across the MENA region, the NDCs cumulatively foresee a need of about $600 billion of new climate finance to achieve the goals in the NDCs across the MENA region on the road to 2030. And achieving this specific capacities, for example, on the policy front, putting in place new policies that can de-risk greater climate finance flows to achieve this goal. In Morocco, for example, through the NDC enhancement process, their part of the process of capacity development resulted in new legislation, climate legislation, that would actually advance that goal of even more ambitious climate action to implement the NDC. Through the NDC capacity development activities in Lebanon, the establishment, in addition to the NDC enhancement itself, but support for establishment of a new low-carbon investment fund for Lebanon to actually serve as a platform, a base, a facility for this kind of scaled-up finance, so creating new institutional mechanisms, new finance instruments, as well as in Sudan, linked to a solar fund, national solar fund, to actually take action on the NDC. So some good examples actually in the MENA region actually in terms of combining the policy support for integrated solutions within the NDCs, but then also setting the base for the scaled up action to achieve that NDC implementation agenda in coming years. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kisham. This is very helpful to understand what is happening in the region and how is the challenges of moving forward and what will be needed in order to overcome the challenges. Now I will want to go with Pemi. Pemi, can you please share what is the status quo in the region in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I think, not wanting to repeat what has already been said, I think it's important to first start by saying that what we also realized was that capacity building was an important enabler for climate action. So that is one of the things that was very much important. And secondly, that not everyone is at the same level of development. So that also applies to the different capacities that are needed. Another thing is that we've also realized that there is a challenge in terms of what are the capacity that are needed if we don't know our capacity building needs. And I think that is one of the things that we also found to be very important, that it is difficult to say that these are the capacity that we need when we don't know what our capacity needs are. So that's one of the things that was also established, especially from all different African countries, and in my country in particular, South Africa. And maybe just to speak about the issue of capacity needed for the horizontal and vertical integration of the NDC. This arises mainly from the lack of the will to create and pursue a narrative for development, which requires commitment for long-term vision. That was one of the things. And lack of strong institutions that are essential for problem solving and translating visions and agendas into action for development of the people. Lack of resources needed in the form of financial and technical, as well as human and political resources. That was also some of the things that was causing the capacity needed for horizontal and vertical integration of NDC. The lack of, not lack, but insufficient funds and access to opportunities for independent, fit for purpose capacity building in more sustainable manner. Because we found that most of the capacities that are provided, they are done in a haphazard way, or rather fragmented, and therefore that also causes a problem, because you see with the NDC integration, some of the countries had consultant coming in to do the actual NDC, and that in itself is a problem, because when the consultant leaves, the capacity is not left in the institutions. And then capacity that was caused from lack of institutional capacity in research and systematic observation, gathering spatial data, and generating downscale climate model and scenario to foster informed local planning and decision making. I think my previous colleague also mentioned that the difficulty between the subnationals, the local government, as well as the national talking to each other, that also has been a problem, because you find that there is not that much of integration or communication between different levels of government, and that is in itself becomes a problem in terms of the implementation, given that most of the capacities that societies have, they are with the civil societies and the academia. So if there is no communication, or at least stakeholder consultation or collaboration, then that also becomes a challenge in terms of how different capacities talk to each other. Now, from the case of South Africa, what we did in terms of stakeholder involvement, as I said, that understanding capacity building challenges often requires coordination, collaboration, and communication across multi-sector and organizational boundaries. In South Africa, we encourage broad stakeholder buy-in through its participatory process. We have what we call the National Climate Change Committee, which serves as a platform to coordinate, obtain broader stakeholder views, and inputs on matters relating to national responsibilities with respect to implementation of climate action, and bringing together representatives from business, civil society, labor, academia, and the government. And then we also have the Intergovernmental Committee on Climate Change, and this is different government departments also talking to each other. As you know, that the NDC, it's not only a mandate of one department, but different departments. And that was also important to include. And then I think the lesson learned and opportunities there was that in terms of lesson learned, we learned that financial and technical resources are hindering progress for integration. Collaboration and knowledge sharing is vital. Capacity building involves learning by doing. Building institutional and human capacity is very important. As I said, that with the consultant leaving, that becomes a problem. Increasing participation in all levels through awareness, so that people are part of the climate action and they are part of the solution. And because climate change action requires everyone, it's not only the responsibility of government. We need to include the need for the inclusion of young people, women, indigenous people, and disabled people, and other marginalized groups was also essential. Capacity building requires a bottom-up approach and not a top-down approach, because it becomes difficult when it is mainly just a top-down approach, but the bottom-up approach was one of the things that we learned was very important. And then the need to take advantage of various platforms to share knowledge and capacitate people using virtual means, as well as through broad-based community outreach programs, workshop meetings, mainstream media, and social media. And just to end, to say that capacity building is intricately linked to climate action, and support is required to meet objectives of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Pemi. I totally agree with all the inputs that you have mentioned. It's very important, all the issues that you raise. How do we close that loop in terms of if the government doesn't have the capacity in place and they keep coming back, getting consultancies to like close those gaps, but you still have that capacity gap when they leave. So this is very important for us to keep continuing the work and forming those capacities in the country, but also at all levels of the stakeholder. And also thank you so much for sharing all the South Africa's experience on this issue and highlighting that finance is still a main gap on how do we actually going to keep creating capacity, not only at the institutional level, but also at the other resources and human level. So thank you so much for that. So let's go to Fernanda. Fernanda, please, you have the floor. Please share us with us.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invite and for the opportunity to be here sharing our experience. WWF has a little bit of a different experience because we are, as you know, a non-governmental organization, and we started looking at NDCs a while ago because we had the same question that many countries do. What does it mean to put out an NDC? What does it mean to do an NDC? Of course, there is the reference of the UNFCCC, which is the ICTU, the information for comprehensive, I forget what it means now, but there's the guidance for clarity, transparency, and something, understanding. Information for clarity, transparency, and understanding, which is a minimum template of the NDC. And we came up with a different vision of an NDC that we call the NDCs we want, because we believe NDCs are social pacts, really. They should be connected to development, and I think this is very common to the experiences that my colleagues presented and to the vision here. Alignment with sustainable development is key. So we started analyzing NDCs of countries based on 5 criteria on this checklist, which are ambition, of course, looking at strength and targets, looking at finance, and also looking at adaptation, to what extent they would involve adaptation. Fostering systemic change, is the NDC addressing sectors? Is it addressing a just transition and enabling sectors such as health, social development? Inclusiveness and participation, we wanted to see to which extent we had processes in which that allowed all stakeholders to participate, and under inclusiveness and participation, we also assessed the governance in the country to put together an NDC and also to implement an NDC, a contribution to sustainable development, of course, linkage to SDGs and nature-based solutions, and tracking progress. If the country had in place some kind of tracking process exercise, and then we rate NDCs from NDCs we don't want to NDCs we want, and we have some mid categories: short way to go, some way to go, and long way to go. So in LAC, we have about 5 NDCs we want. It was an interesting finding. I think that in terms of participation and governance, that connects very much to vertical and horizontal integration. I could say LAC is a good example. I think that in terms of horizontal integration, we saw that some of the NDCs have, some countries have in place structures like councils or tables or committees that engage all the other ministries, and that's key for the success of the NDC, because it's usually the Ministry of Environment or the Ministry of Climate Change, when you have such ministry, that does the planning. But you need the engagement of other ministries, because usually the causes of climate change are in other ministries, and super importantly, the capacity for budgeting and also for finance. You know, some NDCs are conditional. They are conditioned to external finance, and it's really, really important that the conditionalities are well explained, are well based, that there is a rationale of what you're asking that money for and how this money is going to be implemented and delivered. So that's really key as well. And yeah, so that's what we have seen. In terms of vertical integration, we saw some good examples at LAC 2. For example, the Argentinian NDC, they created a structure through law in 2019 that is that is called, sorry, I'm looking here, the National Climate Change Cabinet, and that has a body of meeting of ministers, so that addresses the horizontal integration piece. There is a focal points table composed by members of the public administration. There is a provincial articulation table, so that's composed by representatives of federal and subnational governments. So that's a good example for the region. So if you have an instance, a governance body that can integrate the subnational governments, that's fantastic, because you know a national target could and should be composed of subnational targets, and at the end of the day, those are the ones who will be implementing the NDC. And there's an amplified table also composed by civil society, academia, youth movements, indigenous communities, legislative, executive, and judiciary branches. So that's a good example for the region. And we did a study at the occasion of the Climate Week to look at the NDCs of LAC. We also did for the Africa region and for the MENA region with the information that we had from our analysis of NDCs. And in the case of the LAC region, we saw that all NDCs presented, except for the Brazilian one and the Cuba one, they all had such kind of participatory process or participatory governance. That's a pretty good result. I think in the case of Brazil, it's a bit sad because that's where I'm based, and I can say we have a tradition of consultation and participation that may be because of the current government that's about to end. At that time, we didn't have such a process, but such processes are key because the NDC is only as good as society is able to implement that. So I think this is very, very important. I would like to present another example, that is the example of Colombia. Colombia had a very interesting process of information and sharing information and collecting inputs from indigenous peoples and local communities in Colombia. That's very, very important too. It's not unique of LAC, but it's a big feature of LAC. We know that in Africa that's also a very serious and important issue, but Colombia did a very interesting process with TV ads, with specific materials to allow those communities to participate in the design of the NDC. So I think this kind of initiative and this kind of initiative and process is much needed because that's how you connect the NDC to development. Something that was said here too by my colleague. She mentioned that, you know, there's a need for a narrative development and also a long-term vision. And I think that's super important because that's how you connect the NDC to the long term, because of course NDCs, they have a 5-year cycle, and governments, the majority of them have 4-year cycles, and it's really, really a challenge to make the NDC a government initiative or a government commitment that goes beyond the specific government. So I think the more we can connect the NDCs with long-term strategies and with a long-term vision and perspective, the better. I think this problem with consultants and the capacity not being left in institutions is also not unique to Africa. It's a problem that, you know, the whole of the world has. But I think that capacities are also being developed in governments from participating in this process in different capacities over the years. And I think that's something that countries should take into account and care about, because this is really important. Capacities need to be developed because we will be updating NDCs to comply with the Paris Agreement ambition cycle. And I think a bottom-up approach is key. I mean, there's no way an NDC is going to work from a top-down approach, and I think that partnerships for capacity building or capacity enhancement or for developing NDCs also yield good results. We saw the NDC from Ecuador. It's not considered an enhanced NDC because they adhered to the Paris Agreement later, but they presented an NDC in 2019 that is pretty good, and they had a partnership with UNDP, UNEP, and others, international cooperation, so they address those cross-cutting issues that my other colleague from MENA mentioned of gender very adequately. and youth. So those are all examples that I think are worth mentioning and multiplying. I think capacity building could also have a role in an exchange of experiences between countries, because the more I talk about NDCs and the more I participate in events like this, I see that we have common challenges, and there are lessons out there that could be supporting other countries to address those challenges. So I think the work of the NDC Partnership is key, and WWF is a member of the NDC Partnership. And we also want now to see what the NDCs we want phase 2 could be. And of course, we think that should be implementation. We are still not where the ambition says where we need to be. The latest synthesis report of the UNFCCC says that, you know, the NDCs that we have on the table now, they will reduce 3.6% of emissions, and we need reductions of 43% according to the IPCC by 2030 in relation to 2019 levels, and that's very serious. And we hope the mitigation work program will continue calling for continuous enhancement of NDCs, because the Paris Agreement allows for that. But we know that those continuous enhancements are not an open process of NDCs to completely do a new NDC, because this is complicated, this takes time. This should entail a participatory process of at least 1 year ahead the enhancement, and we know that's complex, but there are actions, there are sectoral initiatives that could be taken to enhance ambition in between cycles, I believe. And I believe it's very important that we continue thinking about NDCs and sharing experiences, because that's the way to empower countries and to keep building their capacity to come up with better NDCs each time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Fernanda. I actually am very, very happy that you mentioned all of that, because the understanding of what is an NDC and what it means to each actor is very important, because you might think that an NDC is very clear, but it's not as clear as you would think, because there's a lot of different opinions on how an NDC should be, what it will include, and this is a very important conversation for you to have in the country. And the highlighting of course, the integration of other ministries besides environment is a key to successful implementation, not only at the term of NDC, but any kind of capacity building in any topic from climate action. But also highlighting the importance of a long-term vision, the narrative of a long-term vision in order to secure sustainability and the actions implemented. Those are very key notes to have in consideration of moving forward. And thank you so much on congratulating and highlighting the importance of the NDC Partnership, because this is exactly what the NDC Partnership is. Getting together all institutions, all members from countries and organizations bring together in order to fill those gaps and capacity building needs, but also in policy infrastructure in terms of climate action at the ground level. Thank you so much for that. Now I would just like to open the floor to the audience. If there's anybody who would like to share experience from the Asian Pacific region, I think will not be complete, this panel, if there's if we cannot have the region from Asia Pacific bring their experience to the floor. So please, anybody from the audience. Yes.
Good.
Over here. Thank you so much. Name and please do share.
Yeah, it's working. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you all the amazing panelists for this important discussion. My name is Kunsang and I'm from Bhutan. I'm really grateful for this opportunity to share some of the capacity building needs and challenges. I'm going to open my phone. I'm going to keep my masks on because my nose somehow doesn't like the air conditioner. It just keeps sneezing, so excuse me for that. Of course, I'll speak for the capacity needs and challenges when it comes to Bhutan, which I feel may pretty much speak to some countries, or mostly applicable to countries in the Asia Pacific. So, in the interest of that, so the capacity needs and challenges, especially for the NDCs, as panelists mentioned, it's really important, but at the same time very challenging as well. Since NDC involves various stakeholders. The participation and needs, especially capacity building of the stakeholder to get involved from the local to national, regional, it's very important but difficult. So therefore for Bhutan, firstly at the policy level we have National Environment Commission, which is a cross-sectoral body chaired by a cabinet minister, and we have various stakeholders from transport to Ministry of Industry to Environment, and then CSO's representation. So this is very much in line with what also WWF representative was stating here, how to have all the interests being represented. So that's the objective. And the National Environment Commission Secretariat coordinates the coordination, involvement, participation of various key stakeholders in the NDC process, in the implementation. So this is very much in line with the climate change policy drafted in 2020. So since the first NDC, INDC came in 2015, the policy coming after that, that was really helpful. Then that kind of made sure that all the relevant stakeholder roles were there, so it was pretty much easy for us, because once it's in the document then the implementation become easier. So the coordination is at various level again, and it's a continuous process, and one of the challenges, which is biggest challenge, is that not everyone has same level of capacity building and the understanding. As Africa, South Africa experience, Peme was mentioning. So some of the challenges, if I can highlight, is not having enough data, information is the underlying issue that we have, because in order for us to understand what are the needs, firstly you have to understand problem. And in order for you to determine the problem, then you have to have information and data. So that's really underlying issue. And then the constraint of when it comes to funding and technical resources is really, of course, a big challenge in order to ensure that different level of adequate participation and involvement of the stakeholder cannot be ensured. And for us, from our experience, capacity building has mostly been project-based and also ad hoc. We've been emphasizing so much on national ownership, institutionalizing of capacity, but mostly that has not been happening. It has been mostly project-based, and once the project stops, then capacity building also kind of stops there. So that is really a huge challenge, and I fully agree with also South Africa. Peme capacity kind of comes with international consultant and goes back with that, and not so much being institutionalized at the national level. So the lesson learned is, of course, the capacity building is continuous. It has to be at different, various level, from local to regional to national. Mostly the coordination, workshop, whatever happens at the national level, and we really don't have key local representation. So how to have that connection, both horizontally as well as vertically, is really a key issue that we are grappling with. And project-based capacity building is not sustainable at all. And when it comes to capacity building, outreach and awareness is a key. And we cannot also have one-size-fit outreach or awareness mechanism, different level. How you reach to local level is totally different from how you reach at the national level. So social media, even for Bhutan, even the radio, plays a very, very important role. Maybe it sounds quite outdated, but it is still relevant. So we have to have that the different good mix of how we reach out to the stakeholders. So this is what I have from Bhutan. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much, Yusan. Thank you so much for sharing those experiences from the Asian Pacific region. It's very important, the highlighting the importance of having information and data available. This is key for any implementation or design or decision making at the moment. Not only for capacity building, but also for any of the climate measures that you need to take on the ground, right? And of course, the importance of having coordinated action and collaboration, as well as a representative at all levels, that being more like a champion and a supervisor in every single activity that they do. And this is key for securing the sustainability of the efforts. And this is something that not only the Asian Pacific region is fighting with and having challenges for, but I think it's something that it's a key element comparable to all the regions in the world. So let's keep doing that. Thank you so much. I just want to go back to the panelists for final consideration. So we heard a lot around their inputs in terms of what is the status quo in terms of the capacity building gaps and needs. But final considerations in terms of what are the key capacity building needs and gaps in the region with regards of the integration of NDCs that are low-hanging fruit. What is it that we can do right now at the moment that can make a difference compared to long-term activities? So let's go with Fernanda now. So Fernanda, please.
Yeah, so for us at WWF, I think that, we are now playing in this space in between ambition and implementation, because I think that at first it was an effort to define targets. Of course, that requires data, as you mentioned, that requires participation, that requires knowledge, capacity, be it consultants or the capacity of people who are developing an NDC. But the NDC now also has to be implemented. Of course, we need better targets, but we need to make this pivot to implementation. So I think that from an implementation perspective, we were, as I mentioned before, we were thinking about the NDCs we want phase 2, and our focus is going to be on the implementation. So we are looking at doing policy toolkits for countries to implement with a sectoral focus. So, for example, energy and food sector were some of the priorities that we were looking at, because it has to do with our own capacity, the interest of countries, etc. So I think this effort of having tools that are accessible to countries and that can speak to countries on really how to put the needed policies and measures in place is what we are looking at. And of course, that's an effort of capacity building. And we hope we can work with governments and other institutions, of course, in partnership to try to build those capacities for countries with a sectoral focus. So that's why it's so important for us that a mitigation work program that eventually will come out of this COP has some kind of sectoral focuses as well, because we think that's now what countries should look at, to be able to look at the sectors that are important and what can they can deliver on those specific sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernanda. Hemi, go over to you.
Thank you very much. I think what capacity is really needed, I think we've already said it, and I'm going to repeat it. I think what's important is the capacity for the institutions. and sustainable capacity for the institution is what is important. Because we can talk about the capacities that are needed and talk about this and that, but if the institutions themselves are not capacitated, then we're just going to speak until Jesus comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pemi. And sadly, Kishan had to leave, but Benjamin, his colleague, is here on behalf of him. So Benjamin, please do share final considerations.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, and thank you, colleagues. So my name is Benjamin Basmaji, and I work at the UNDP Regional Hub for Arab States as a climate change specialist. And so to answer your questions, there are a lot of gaps and needs, of course, and something that I want to reiterate is the importance of tools. Something we've seen in the region is basically that we train the different local governments and participants there, and then all of a sudden that information also disappears. So that is a big gap that we basically see. So having a tool where everything is collected is extremely important. That is just a very quick summary of what we see as a gap and need.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you for our audience. This was a very rich discussion, and I'm sure that all the inputs that was shared here and all the lessons learned and the gaps remaining will shape the future work on capacity building and NDC implementation all over the world. I think we have run a little bit out of time. I really wanted to give the floor, the audience the floor for any final remarks or consideration, but I see people saying that we run out of time. but I do want to have just one remark from the audience. So I'm just not going to. Okay, so we have several remarks. We have good time. Okay, yeah, pressure, social pressure. So no, I'm sorry. So I have the lady on the back first, and then here, there, and the fourth person that is behind you, right? So please state your name and please keep it short, interactions, and please go ahead.
Yes, hello, I'm Arif from Sudan. It's not a question, it's just a comment for all of us to think about it. I also want to raise the point of the colleague here said about capacitating the institution, but also sectoral upfront challenges. Just to give an example, we were now discussing, for example, if you want to have an NDC which includes waste management, wastewater management, the problem is not that you need how to implement the wastewater, the methane reduction from wastewater management system, but to have the wastewater management system from the beginning. And here is one of the challenges that you need to think about in different developing countries. How can we end up to the end point of having a specific project? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very, very good, insightful experience. Yes, thank you.
I'm Wood Spencer from Antigua. I've seen some errors made in our NDC. One of the panelists said there's need for good stakeholder involvement across ministries. And when the Department of Environment put their NDC together, the utility companies seemed not to be involved. So they went ahead and ordered all these huge big wind turbines. And today, since 2015, they're sitting in storage because the utility company has had a partnership, public-private sector agreement with a company, and so they don't see the need to rush to renewable energy because they have to pay for this partnership. So their effort is every time somebody gets a permit to install renewable energy, they see it as losing cash. And so they are in no hurry to. Another thing is the sites for these big wind turbines were not properly earmarked. So you want to put it by the airport, you want to put it here. It's a, different things are happening. So today, the funding for these big bases was not included in the funding. So we have quite a bit of challenges in Antigua. But it's so important to bring in all the institutions. Let everybody have a common vision going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, really good to hear about the experience of Antigua and the challenges as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm going to make mine short and sweet. My name is Imali Ngusale, and I'm from Kenya. I was just wondering what would be the proposed lifespan for NDCs. I had the privilege of reviewing 5 NDCs in Africa, and I wasn't able to really review, I wasn't able to see some of the statistics that include young people's needs. And then the other thing was, just from the discussion, I noticed that it's more or less like an exclusive agenda, particularly because the reviews that are done periodically, and not many people are aware of the dates in advance. So by the time they are presented or reviewed by UNFCCC, we're not very clear on the agendas that are there, whether they are actually current or things that were reviewed 5 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you so much. 2 very important questions. And I think this is the central point of this conversation and what we're actually doing here at COP, right? So I just want to give the floor back to the panelists to see if there's any reactions, any answers to that question. Yes, Fernanda.
No, it's not an answer. I just wanted to compliment that we heard some very concrete examples on waste management, Antigua, etc. And that's what happens when, you know, there is no involvement. When we think of an NDC as just a political document that a government's doing to comply with an international requirement. So I think the more we can connect that to the decisions that are made on the ground that will define, you know, investments and even the future of people, the better.
Thank you so much. Yes, Remy.
Thank you very much. I think the one on the others were mainly comments, and I think the last one regarding the involvement of the youth. I think that's where more needs to be done. If it's something that we can say there's room for improvement in terms of how we involve the youth in the NDC implementations as well as consultation. And the other question on how earlier can we make the reports available? I think that's what you asked. And there I want to say the reports are made available. Maybe the issue is how it's communicated to the national governments. And that is something that, you know, can be a responsibility also of the UNFCCC focal points in terms of what information is there so that societies are made aware of the information that is available. And maybe that also goes to the UNFCCC to say that the information must come out on time so that people have enough time to review them. Thank you.
Thank you, Pemi. Benjamin, did you want to comment? Yes, please.
Yes, I'll come in quickly on the last question regarding youth, and basically also to compliment my colleague, and thank you so much for that. So on youth, UNDP is working with the Climate Promise, where we basically work with 7 countries in the region to enhance the NDCs. And in this, in every implementation of the NDCs, we consult youths, mainly as 70% of youth in the Arab region sees climate change as an urgent emergency, actually. So we try to highlight that in all the implementations and enhancement of the NDCs.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Benjamin. Again, a huge thanks to our panelists, and of course, a huge thanks to our audience, which is very active and involved in our discussion. And I think this is key. We're all in this together, and this is one of the ways that we are actually going to move forward on the implementation. So I just want to go and give back the floor to Rosibel Martinez from the PCCB for close this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jennifer, Dr. Cavaro, Pemi, and Benjamin. As you saw, it was a very rich discussion. I think throughout the day, you'll have an opportunity. If you want to stay, you can see the program. We're having integrating Indigenous peoples in the NDC through capacity development, and other and gender throughout the day. So for this time being, we close the event. It was a richful discussion. I congratulate you on, and we see you for the next panel. Thank you.
Sí.
Buenos días. Uy, perdón. Is there somebody in here that needs English translation? We have only three more. You have to decide for me. Okay. Vamos a comenzar, por favor, porque estamos un poquito retrasados. Bienvenidos a esta sesión sobre lecciones aprendidas de la participación de pueblos indígenas en iniciativas forestales y cómo esa participación los ha ido empoderando y ha permitido su participación también en los NDCs de sus países. Queremos agradecer al PCCB por este espacio, que es una colaboración entre la Fundación Indígena, la Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques, AMPB, la Asociación de Investigación y Desarrollo Integral del Perú, AIDER, y Ecosphere. Mi nombre es Rita Espadafora y yo soy la líder del programa de desarrollo de capacidades e inclusión del programa IPAR, que es la Alianza Global de Pueblos Indígenas para el Desarrollo y los Derechos, implementado por la Fundación Indígena. Y en el día de hoy estaré facilitando este intercambio con estos distinguidos panelistas. Es un honor tenerlos aquí en el día de hoy. Existe un reconocimiento para todos los que estamos trabajando con y para los pueblos indígenas, de que facilitar su participación en eventos internacionales como la COP y otros eventos regionales y nacionales no es suficiente, que para asegurar la participación efectiva en estos espacios de toma de decisión es importante que también cuenten con las capacidades, que conozcan de los aspectos técnicos, de los marcos regulatorios que les permitan de verdad incidir en la toma de decisiones. Pero además es importante pasar no solo de las capacidades de los líderes indígenas, sino también llevar algún tipo de información mínima a los pueblos indígenas, a los que están más cerca del territorio, para que puedan tener un entendimiento más claro y puedan tener una posición y una voz más unificada. Hoy queremos compartir con ustedes dos experiencias, una en Costa Rica y otra en Perú, sobre la participación de pueblos indígenas en mecanismos Red Plus. Esperamos que lo que discutamos hoy pueda servirnos de guía para mejorar nuestros esfuerzos en el desarrollo de capacidades de los pueblos indígenas. Voy a empezar la primera experiencia con Levi Sucre. Levi es un indígena bribri del territorio indígena Talamanca, Cabecar, en Costa Rica, quien dirigió la Consulta Nacional para Red Plus en su país. Actualmente dirige la gestión técnica y organizativa de la Red Indígena Bribri Cabecar, RITCA, un grupo de 8 territorios indígenas de Costa Rica. Levi tiene más de 20 años de experiencia en desarrollo rural y organización comunitaria y es actualmente coordinador de la Alianza Mesoamericana de Pueblos y Bosques y copresidente de la Alianza Global de Comunidades Territoriales. Levi, solo tenemos 5 minutos, pero quisiera que nos contaras de forma abreviada cómo fue esa relación entre RIPCAR y el Estado, y cómo pudieron armar ese mecanismo de conservación de bosques que luego pues le dio paso a su participación en el proceso de la estrategia RED, etcétera. Y además, si tienes tiempo, me gustaría que nos hablaras de cómo fue el desarrollo de ese esquema de distribución de beneficios que para muchos de nosotros es un ejemplo que fue diseñado ya para Costa Rica. Adelante.
Gracias, Rita, y gracias por estar con nosotros en este Site Event. La experiencia de Costa Rica surge desde una iniciativa del gobierno desde 1997 que establece un pago por servicio ambiental directo a los territorios, y esa confianza que se obtuvo de los pueblos indígenas con los pueblos indígenas fue la base, digamos, de poder construir una estrategia nacional red consultada que hoy está aprobada y que tiene los mecanismos acordados con los pueblos indígenas, el cual voy a puntualizar por efecto de tiempos, y que le ha estado permitiendo al gobierno costarricense tener acceso a fondos internacionales importantes debido a que ya hay un acuerdo nacional con los pueblos indígenas sobre la estrategia de Red Más. El primer elemento que de lección aprendida sobre este proceso es que el gobierno facilitó técnica y financieramente que quienes dirigiéramos la consulta y la discusión sobre red fuéramos nosotros, los mismos líderes indígenas. El segundo elemento fue que siempre hubo un contraparte gubernamental que estaba dialogando y negociando con nosotros conforme iba avanzando la discusión a nivel de los territorios sobre la estrategia nacional red. El tercer elemento, que es bien importante, es la comprensión para el proceso de consulta de temas tan complicados como es el cambio climático, como es el efecto invernadero y como es red. Allí nosotros tuvimos que incorporar la figura del mediador cultural, que eran especialmente jóvenes y que hablaban la lengua y que entendían todos estos conceptos técnicos y lo transmitían en la lengua indígena para que se comprendiera mejor. Durante todo el proceso de consulta participaron más de 100 mediadores culturales haciendo esta interpretación y comprensión de lo que es la estrategia red y lo que es todo el tema de la problemática del cambio climático. Una de las enseñanzas bien importantes sobre esto es que llegar a hablar a las comunidades del efecto invernadero, del calentamiento global, de la capa de ozono, eso no se entiende. Eso no se entiende a nivel de las comunidades. Hay que hablar del efecto directo que ya se está viviendo en las comunidades para poder entender esto. Por ejemplo, las grandes inundaciones, tiempo que debía llover ya no llueve, tiempo que los árboles deberían dar sus frutos pero ya no lo están dando. Hay que llevar la información con la realidad que vive el pueblo para entender esta problemática de cambio climático. Logramos otro, creo que es el cuarto elemento bien importante, es integrar en la estrategia nacional de red el concepto de bosque desde la cosmovisión indígena. Esto es bien importante porque la visión cosmogónica de los bosques, de los pueblos indígenas, va más allá de los árboles, los ríos, etcétera. Tiene intrínsecamente todo un tema espiritual que debe comprenderse a la hora de emitir políticas, a la hora de pertenecer, por ejemplo, a un programa de créditos de carbono. Deben entenderse este concepto de los pueblos indígenas sobre los bosques, que difiere mucho y bastante sobre el concepto que normalmente se maneja en el país. Eso fue un logro de la estrategia, lograr incorporar esta conceptualización. Y no sé cómo están con el tiempo, pero voy bien, exactamente. Otro elemento, bueno, con estas discusiones también hubo un tema central, que es la relación que tienen los territorios indígenas con las áreas silvestres protegidas administradas por el gobierno. Ahí se trabajó fuerte en todo lo que tiene que ver con los usos culturales, e incluso con la distribución de beneficios de esas áreas protegidas para nuestros pueblos, porque los pueblos indígenas en Costa Rica estamos alrededor de las áreas protegidas del país y cumplimos una función crucial en proteger esas áreas protegidas en Costa Rica. Entonces, este tema también fue discutido en la Estrategia Nacional Red y todo se fue plasmando en acuerdos con el gobierno para poder tener una estrategia consultada bajo los mecanismos que realmente permitió la participación de los pueblos indígenas. Ahora, esto no es fácil, ni es gratis. Esto cuesta mucho. Se invirtieron, duramos como 4 años haciendo esta estrategia porque tuvimos que ir aprendiendo. Y también se invirtió bastante dinero, cerca de $1 millón se gastó en todo el proceso. Y hoy, viéndolo en retrospectiva, fue una inversión mínima para el gobierno de Costa Rica. Porque una vez ni siquiera se había terminado el plan de distribución de beneficios, que es la otra, voy a hacerlo en el último minuto, ya el gobierno había adquirido $114 millones, precisamente porque había hecho una consulta con nosotros. Entonces, realmente el millón que invirtió fue poco con relación a lo que rápidamente logró el país conseguir gracias a este trabajo. Y no solo eso, sino que le va a permitir en los próximos 15 años tal vez seguir captando fondos precisamente por ese trabajo que se hizo. ¿Cuál es el mensaje aquí? Que el trabajo con los pueblos indígenas no es un asunto puntual de un proyecto, es un planteamiento estratégico a largo plazo, que hoy le puede parecer caro al gobierno, pero en el futuro va a ser barato realmente la inversión que se hace, porque no estamos pensando en algo de un día, de un proyecto, estamos pensando en un proceso más de largo plazo. Si me queda un minuto, me queda un minuto. Entonces, también no solo se trata de este marco, también tuvimos que discutir, bueno, y esos proyectos que vienen al país, esos miles de dólares que llegan al país, ¿cómo nos benefician a nosotros? Y ahí tuvimos que hacer otra negociación con el gobierno para establecer qué porcentaje de esos fondos nos llega a nosotros y para eso utilizamos todo el sistema que tiene el país de la cantidad de bosques de tenencia en el país, y en el caso de los pueblos indígenas en Costa Rica, la cobertura boscosa, el 10% está en manos de los territorios indígenas. Entonces el 10% de todo recurso que entre de proyectos en el marco de la estrategia red van directo a los pueblos indígenas. Pero además negociamos algo más. Como nosotros somos los que protegemos las áreas protegidas, porque el gobierno no tiene capacidad, negociamos que de los fondos del Sistema Nacional de Áreas Protegidas se crea 2 fondos importantes. Uno, un fondo inclusivo para mujeres, jóvenes y adultos y todo el tema de mayores, y otro fondo para emprendimientos sostenibles. Esos 2 fondos se crearon con el porcentaje que le corresponde al gobierno, y nosotros los indígenas tenemos acceso a ellos mediante llamados de proyectos a financiar. Entonces, en resumen, eso fue lo que se acordó en el plan de distribución de beneficios. Detalles hay mucho, pero solo tengo 5 minutos. Gracias, Rita.
Gracias, Levi, muchas gracias. Yo creo que es obvio que lo que se da o lo que cuesta comunicar e incluir a los pueblos indígenas en estos procesos no es un gasto, es una inversión y es un deber de los gobiernos. Vamos a seguir con la segunda experiencia que compartimos hoy, que es la Alianza Forestal, una iniciativa de manejo de bosques comunales en el Perú, que incorpora Red Más, desarrollada por AIDER con 7 comunidades indígenas de la Amazonía. 2 de estas comunidades están certificadas por el FSC. Esto también está apoyado por Mirova Natural Capital, Ecosphere Plus y USAID. Para hablar de esta experiencia queremos escuchar a Diana Mori, líder indígena de la etnia Shipibo-Conibo, educadora bilingüe con experiencia ancestral en la gestión sostenible de los bosques amazónicos y artesana. Diana fue la primera mujer indígena en ejercer un cargo como funcionaria pública en la Gerencia de Desarrollo de Pueblos Indígenas del Gobierno Regional de Ucayali, y actualmente es promotora de manejo de bosques comunales en AIDER. Diana nos va a contar las fortalezas que han desarrollado gracias a este trabajo que han hecho con AIDER, y también nos va a hablar de las fortalezas que han ido desarrollando para manejar el recurso forestal de forma sostenible. Diana, en 5 minutitos quisiéramos que nos hablara de cómo ahora han podido también influir en temas nacionales y cómo ha sido esa participación de la mujer indígena en estos procesos.
Muy buenos días a la audiencia, muy buenos días, agradecer por la invitación, agradecer también a los que nos han financiado este pasaje para venir hasta acá y lograr dar esta semilla que sale de la palabra, del pensamiento. Yo soy Diana Mori González, una mujer indígena. Vengo de 18 hijos que tuvo mi madre y he sido la única mujer en esta familia. Primero tenía que luchar en mi familia mismo y luego en la comunidad, luego en la sociedad. Cuando nosotros estábamos luchando por nuestros derechos colectivos, por nuestras tierras, por nuestra agua, luchábamos solos. El Estado no llega hacia nosotros. Cuando tienes muchos bosques, tienes muchas cosas, eres vulnerable a que todos quieran entrar a sacar tus recursos. Y para luchar y para defender somos pocos, pero hemos sido resilientes en el tiempo, hemos sido fuertes. Básicamente, las mujeres hemos sido fuertes para defender nuestro territorio, así defender a nuestras hijas, a nuestros hijos y el bienestar de nuestra vida misma. Si hubiéramos tenido estas alianzas mucho más antes, hubiéramos tenido mucho más bosques. Nos han llevado nuestros buenos árboles, hemos a veces hemos regalado por ropa, por sal, por otras cosas. Pero nunca es tarde para empezar a construir nuevas propuestas. En estas propuestas es lo que entra AIDER en el año 2000 con nuevas propuestas. Y nosotros ya teníamos construido las propuestas desde los conocimientos ancestrales que nosotros tenemos de nuestros padres, de nuestros antepasados, de cuidar nuestros bosques hasta con nuestras vidas. Es eso el lema que tienen los pueblos indígenas, porque todo el bosque que nos rodea está en nuestra historia, están nuestros ancestros enterrados en nuestros territorios. Por eso es que no podemos dejar nuestros territorios, y si es que lo vamos a defender con nuestras vidas y con nuestras fuerzas. Eso es el lema del indígena, porque el bosque es nuestro todo, nuestro hábitat. Partiendo de esa premisa, es que hemos articulado las acciones que tiene AIDER para conservación de bosque. Primero era chocante, porque los pueblos indígenas, ¿cuándo íbamos a pensar que los bosques íbamos a cuidar? Si es que hemos nacido entre los bosques, ¿cómo vamos a cuidar? Pero nos hemos dado cuenta que con el tiempo el recurso forestal escasea, los peces escasean, las inundaciones crecen y los huracanes también. Entonces decimos, está pasando algo y tenemos que tomar conciencia y criterio sobre estas cosas. Es por eso que hemos aceptado el trabajo de AIDER. Pero AIDER no entró, ¿qué vamos a hacer con los trabajos técnicos? No, lo que AIDER ha hecho es escuchar primero cuáles son las propuestas que tiene la comunidad. Hemos consensuado, de acuerdo, lo consensuado, hemos empezado a trabajar. Como los pueblos indígenas sabemos dónde crece la yuca, dónde crece el plátano, dónde crece todo. Así es que hemos integrado estos saberes tecnológicos, gracias a estas capacitaciones tecnológicas que hemos tenido, hemos podido saber más de técnicas de cuidado, de manejo y conservación de los bosques. En el 2005 hemos conseguido en el Perú, mi comunidad nativa Callería, la certificación forestal voluntario, y con eso hemos obtenido el sello verde. Quiere decir que nuestro bosque tiene trazabilidad legal y nuestros recursos también tienen trazabilidad legal. Desde ahí nosotros hemos hecho la empresa Nibiri. Ya tenemos los recursos, ahora tenemos que generar economía para la educación de nuestros hijos. Y eso no lo hemos conseguido solo, lo hemos conseguido en unidad, en consenso. Eso es el desarrollo que estoy viniendo. Sí se puede. Cuando más alianzas tenemos para construir la conservación de los bosques, es donde encontramos más visibilidad y fortaleza. En realidad, hermanos, el bosque tiene todo, tiene medicina, tiene curaciones. El bosque no solamente es el bosque, también son sus recursos del suelo, del agua. Esto hemos podido capitalizar. Eso es.
Gracias,
ahora
Diana.
Estamos preparados para vender nuestros recursos. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Diana. Muchas gracias por esa perseverancia, sobre todo por su calidad de condición de mujer indígena. Nuestro siguiente panelista es Berlín Díquez. Berlín es líder indígena del pueblo Ashaninka de la Amazonía peruana. Es presidente de la organización regional de AIDESEP en Ucayali, Orao, y participa en las reuniones de la Plataforma de Cambio Climático de Pueblos Indígenas del Perú, así como en otros espacios de diálogo sobre bosques, territorios indígenas y cambio climático, representando a los pueblos indígenas de su región. En 5 minutos, Berlín, nos gustaría conocer qué piensa del proceso que viene implementando el gobierno peruano para diseñar e implementar las metas climáticas. ¿Cómo ha sido la participación de los pueblos indígenas en este proceso y cómo han construido ustedes sus capacidades para participar?
Buenos días a todos. Yo quiero empezar tal vez resumiendo una de las salvaguardas muy importantes y más valiosas que durante todo este proceso tal vez de lucha, resiliencia en el movimiento indígena de nuestra Amazonía del Perú, fue tan importante la intervención de manera directa desde los pueblos indígenas. Yo quiero ser claro y sincero que la implementación política que hace el gobierno peruano ante un Estado, ante un sector que corresponde más del 60% de territorio nacional como es la Amazonía peruana, no tiene las condiciones claras. Y cuando hablo de una salvaguarda indispensable a un pueblo indígena, quiero decir que el territorio, como ya muchos lo mencionaron, es de vital importancia. Sin la seguridad jurídica, legal del territorio de los pueblos indígenas, no podemos hablar tal vez de otros mecanismos que garanticen prácticamente la mitigación del cambio climático y esta crisis mundial que atraviesa nuestro mundo en este momento. Ahí yo quiero oír que el gobierno peruano, y no solamente el actual, sino los otros anteriores, no tienen una política clara frente a la seguridad territorial de comunidades. Y ahí donde que se puede recordar la cooperación internacional a través de los grupos de la sociedad civil, como ya lo mencionó Diana en este momento, es de algunas instituciones como es AIDER. Tenemos que primero asegurar territorios, si no, ¿de qué estaríamos hablando? Y allí claramente el Estado peruano, en este gobierno y las anteriores, no lo tienen clarísimo. Se han creado mecanismos, por ejemplo, la conservación de bosques a través de las transferencias directas. Sin embargo, con unas ciertas limitaciones de un trabajo eficiente. Es allí donde que el Estado no garantiza prácticamente ese desarrollo de conservación de bosques en las comunidades. Acaba de mencionar el compañero Levi el tema de que cómo es que las comunidades o los pueblos indígenas reciben la mejor forma de distribución equitativa de los recursos que pasan por el Estado. No lo existe en el Perú. Es un problema complicadísimo y quisiera decir a la audiencia, yo parto diciendo de que esta salvaguarda, como ya lo mencioné, el tema de la seguridad territorial, es indispensable que se tome en cuenta en todos los espacios y escenarios que demandamos los amazónicos, no solamente de Perú, sino a nivel de los países donde tienen Amazonía. Y lo otro es fundamentalmente, por ejemplo, en este momento en el Perú existe, de tanta lucha y exigencia al gobierno actual y la anterior en los últimos 5 años, estamos solicitando por lo menos un dispositivo legal o instrumento legal que garantice prácticamente los procesos que más adelante debemos tener los pueblos indígenas. Es la famosa llamado el Registro Nacional de Medidas de Mitigación, en este caso RENAMI. Hace 2 semanas atrás, bajo la estructura orgánica de nuestra organización representativa como es AIDECEP y sus organizaciones regionales como es ORAU, al cual represento, hemos estado haciendo el llamado al gobierno peruano a través del Ministerio del Ambiente a que de una vez por todos agilicen rápidamente este instrumento que puede garantizar más adelante la seguridad de este planteamiento. Estamos contribuyendo los pueblos indígenas nuestra sabiduría para que en ese instrumento se contemple la participación plena y no solamente de opinión, sino también de ejecución de los proyectos que vienen a favor de las comunidades nativas. En el país nuestro, con un gobierno tal vez lleno de incertidumbre social y ambiental, estamos clamando los pueblos indígenas frente a este gran cambio. No solamente en Costa Rica, no solamente en México, Brasil, Bolivia, es el cambio que se ha generado a nivel de la Amazonía. Hay muchos cambios generados y solamente por no tener unas políticas públicas claras. También queremos compartir los avances que hasta en este momento se han dado con algunas intervenciones de algunas ONGs, como la que ya mencionó Diana, el tema de cómo es que los pueblos indígenas, si esperamos por sí el del Estado, no vamos a encontrar nada. Es por ello que buscamos alianzas estratégicas de sinergias con otras instituciones que ayuden tal vez a complementar lo que el Estado no hace por los pueblos indígenas. Es allí donde necesitamos la cooperación internacional para hacer un debido proceso de cómo debemos cuidar nuestro medio ambiente. Lamentablemente, muchos de las empresas, tanto piratas como los hemos llamado, han estado interviniendo en lugares de comunidades nativas sin la participación de los pueblos indígenas bajo una estructura organizacional. Es allí donde tuvimos muchos problemas. En el ingreso estuvimos compartiendo algunas experiencias que muchas de las empresas han hecho mucho daño a estos tipos de intereses colectivos que ayuden a mitigar el cambio climático. Sin embargo, hay algunas otras empresas que son buenas en ayudar prácticamente todos los procesos que se vienen dándose frente a cómo los pueblos indígenas debemos seguir cooperando o colaborando con esta mitigación grande que atraviesa el mundo. Entonces, hay instituciones que ya tienen una cierta experiencia, que esas experiencias deben ser validadas más adelante porque nos han servido como modelo.
Muchas gracias. Gracias, Berlín.
Gracias.
Yo creo que el mensaje claro es que solamente cuando los pueblos indígenas entienden, pueden realmente discernir cuáles son las iniciativas que son beneficiosas realmente y cuáles no, cuando se acercan a ustedes y las alianzas que corresponden. Ahora quiero continuar contigo, Marioldi, como parte de AIDER, que ha venido implementando estas iniciativas forestales, y tú que has observado el proceso Red Plus en Perú por varios años, ¿cuáles han sido esas oportunidades que han ido ustedes abriendo con la Alianza Forestal y otros proyectos de manejo forestal sostenible, y ese ambiente habilitador que han ido creando gracias a esta experiencia que ha permitido una mayor participación de los pueblos indígenas en el Perú?
Sí, gracias. Gracias, Rita. Buenos días con todos, con todas. ¿Sí se escucha, no? Sí, bueno, a mí me gustaría destacar justo a partir de lo que acaba de mencionar Berlín, las alianzas estratégicas, ¿no? Y creo que una de las principales cosas que la Alianza Forestal y la iniciativa Red Plus Nicaniti, que es parte de este proyecto Alianza Forestal, viene a traer a lo que es el proceso de desarrollo de capacidades, es poder hacer que converjan diferentes experiencias, perspectivas, saberes de una diversidad de actores, porque nuestros proyectos involucran, por supuesto, a comunidades indígenas, a sociedad civil, a AIDER, a otras ONGs, al sector privado y al gobierno. Y yo quisiera destacar tal vez, yo sé que hablamos de la gran brecha de desarrollo de capacidades y lo importante, ya lo han expresado aquí los compañeros, hay mucho por hacer desde un desarrollo de capacidades hacia los pueblos indígenas, pero creo que poco se habla sobre también lo que tenemos que aprender los demás sectores. Porque nos queda claro, habiendo escuchado a Levi, por ejemplo, hablar de la perspectiva de lo que son los bosques para los pueblos indígenas, y que parece obvio, pero no todo el mundo lo está entendiendo. Todavía tenemos mucho que seguir aprendiendo también los demás sectores, ¿no? Entonces, creo que ese es un primer factor o un primer elemento que viene desde la Alianza Forestal a aportar a este entorno habilitante, ¿no? A este entorno habilitante para un mejor diálogo intersectorial entre actores, que viene a partir de esta experiencia, ¿no? Todos tenemos un objetivo en común, pero sabemos que a veces las perspectivas no siempre están alineadas, pero eso se puede trabajar, ¿no? Se puede construir, y para eso necesitamos efectivamente, ¿no?, mucho esfuerzo aún por poder lograr un verdadero intercambio de saberes, ¿no?, y que nos permita desarrollar capacidades a todos. Y con mucha base, pues, en toda esta sabiduría ancestral que indudablemente tienen los pueblos indígenas, que son los que están viviendo en los bosques y que además sus medios de vida dependen de los bosques. Y un segundo punto, para no extenderme mucho, también tiene que ver con esta perspectiva indígena sobre los bosques, ¿no? Creo que la Alianza Forestal y AIDER, y seguimos comprometidos, yo creo que aún hay mucho para seguir mejorando. Aquí el hermano Berlín sabe de que no todo en la historia han sido siempre aciertos. También hemos, ¿no?, tenido varios asuntos que nos han llevado a generar muchas lecciones aprendidas, pero creo que es importante que los proyectos partan desde la mirada del manejo integral de los territorios y los bosques, y que cuando se hable de metas climáticas no se esté pensando únicamente en la reducción de emisiones. Creo de que justamente lo que aportan los pueblos indígenas tiene que ver con esta mirada integral y cómo a partir de caminar juntos hacia estas metas climáticas se van desarrollando otras condiciones habilitantes, otros aspectos importantes, ¿no? Armonizando protección, evitar deforestación, pero también asegurar economías sostenibles, medios de vida indígenas. Por supuesto, la seguridad territorial es una prioridad, y puedo decir bastante contenta de que estos beneficios que están empezando a llegar por los mercados de carbono voluntario en el marco de la Alianza Forestal Nica-Niti están en primera instancia siendo destinados por estas 7 comunidades para la seguridad territorial, ¿no? Que sin ello, ¿no?, una condición habilitante importante, así como el fortalecimiento de la gobernanza, son aspectos fundamentales para poder realmente avanzar hacia las metas climáticas. Creo que lo dejo ahí para poder tener un espacio.
Gracias, Marioldi. Yo creo que es bueno resaltar algo que hablábamos antes en preparación para esta sesión, y era el trabajo que ustedes habían hecho en un mayor entendimiento por parte de las autoridades sobre estos procesos, porque si no hay del otro lado una contraparte que está educada también en estos temas, es muy difícil crear esos diálogos. Bueno, ya para terminar, quisiera pedirle a los 4 panelistas, otra vez entre 3 y 5 minutos, que nos hablaran exactamente de las capacidades que ustedes desarrollaron o que tuvieron que desarrollar en el camino, que les gustaría que nosotros, los que trabajamos con ustedes, tuviéramos más claro para que el esfuerzo que hagamos en el futuro para capacitar a más líderes y también a las poblaciones sea más enfocado y que lo podamos hacer de forma más rápida, ¿sí? Yo le preguntaría a Levi, por ejemplo, ¿qué recomendación nos da? ¿Qué temas específicos dentro de nosotros hablamos de desarrollo de capacidades, pero cuáles temas necesitan ustedes dominar para poder empoderarse con los temas de cambio climático?
Bien, yo quisiera concentrarme hay muchas áreas, pero como tenemos poco tiempo, quisiera concentrarme en la necesidad de garantizar que las iniciativas, ya sea de la COP, Artículo 6, Acuerdo de París, proyectos, lo que sea, que venga de lo externo, realmente dialogue con lo que se está haciendo en la comunidad. Hay un abismo entre lo que hacemos nosotros en las comunidades y lo que dicen los marcos lógicos de los proyectos o lo que dicen estas declaraciones aquí en la COP. O sea, no logra entenderse. Entonces, por mucho que uno quisiera que llegara la información a la gente y se comprenda, no es posible. Por eso es que nosotros tuvimos que desarrollar todo un mecanismo de mediadores culturales. Por eso, y eso es en diferentes temas. Acá tenemos la experiencia de una organización de mujeres que tuvieron que desarrollar un concepto de las tejedoras del conocimiento. Porque si uno no logra transmitir estos acuerdos internacionales o temas tan técnicos como efecto invernadero, como crédito de carbono, como calentamiento global, esos términos que no se manejan en las comunidades, nunca vamos a entender lo que nos quieren decir y nunca vamos a llegar a acuerdos. Y decía que aquí un grupo de mujeres, para poder integrar el conocimiento tradicional indígena de la cosmovisión bríbrica Bécar en una iniciativa de producción, tuvieron que crear el concepto de las tejedoras del conocimiento. O sea, hay una barrera entre lo que se dice en estas COP, por ejemplo, y lo que realmente hacemos en las comunidades, que hay que superar, y eso pasa por todos los actores que están apoyando, trabajando con los pueblos indígenas. Pero, Rita, hay un problema mayor ahora y una amenaza mayor. Ahora tenemos una avalancha de compradores de carbono, que llegan a nuestros territorios a decirnos que eso es la octava maravilla del mundo y que con eso solo que usted firme un papel ya usted arregló el problema del cambio climático. Y después termina siendo una estafa, termina siendo algo peligroso para los líderes, porque en algunos casos le ponen hasta cláusulas de confidencialidad, que ni siquiera usted puede ir a preguntarle al amigo o al otro, decirle, mire, ¿qué estoy firmando? Entonces, es urgente que trabajar en la comprensión de los diferentes lenguajes que se están utilizando en estos temas de cambio climático.
Gracias, Levi. Quisiera hacerle la misma pregunta a Diana. Diana, ¿qué capacidades ustedes necesitan ahora para fortalecer ese manejo forestal sostenible en los territorios?
Nosotros tenemos ya la trazabilidad del bosque, necesitamos que nos inyecten de tecnologías en la comunidad, como luz, agua buena. Cuando una comunidad está con esta comunidad ha tenido varios procesos y este proceso de cambio de estos temas nuevos, se necesita mucha socialización. La socialización se debe hacer en el propio lenguaje de los mismos hablantes de cada país, porque ellos ya tienen desarrollado las metodologías, cómo articular y desarrollar a un buen entendimiento. Se necesitaría más capacitación, más información transparente de ambos lugares. Se necesita que el carbono esté estandarizado y que no diga yo doy esta cantidad. No, necesitamos buena información de ambas partes, necesitamos seriedad, porque si no se va a hacer un conflicto social, se crea un conflicto social dentro de la comunidad, porque quién da más, quién da menos. Nosotros no queremos esto, queremos una transparencia. Por eso es que nosotros hemos optado los trabajos con AIDER, porque ya hemos venido trabajando estos procesos. Además, no ha sido muy burocrático trabajar con AIDER, sino directamente, ¿no? Entonces, esas son las capacidades que hemos desarrollado. Tenemos mobiliarios de carpetas que vender al Estado, y nosotros lo que queremos ahora es negociar con el Estado nuevo entrante, porque queremos vender nuestros productos que tienen el sello verde y generar economía, y esta economía va desarrollada también tanto de los hombres y tanto de las mujeres. Eso es lo que en este fase que queremos, en este nuevo fase y con los proyectos red que queremos trabajar. Las alianzas son buenas, pero necesitamos una buena información de las dos partes con transparencia para que nuestras comunidades también escuchen, porque el ser humano es la persona que ha desarrollado más capacidades e inteligencia sobre todos los seres vivos, y por eso las comunidades tenemos la capacidad de adaptarnos a los nuevos cambios que vienen. No que los indígenas no van a entender, entendemos los indígenas qué es lo que está pasando y queremos tomar nuestras propias decisiones firmes, claras y transparentes. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Diana. Berlín, ¿qué mensaje usted tiene para los gobiernos o el gobierno de Perú sobre su esfuerzo en mejorar las capacidades de los pueblos indígenas?
La lucha nuestra, como ya lo mencioné al inicio, es de que existan instrumentos como es la que yo mencioné en el Perú, es el RENAMI, el Registro Nacional de Medidas de Mitigación, y que esos instrumentos sean participativas, socializadas desde el primer diseño y formulación de este instrumento, y que allí hay un rol muy importante de que los gobiernos o el sector público correspondiente los tome en cuenta la participación plena de las organizaciones o los líderes indígenas quienes formamos parte. En segunda parte es de que se haga una campaña informativa desde las propias organizaciones o comunidades indígenas para estos tipos de escenarios, como ahora es el tema de la captura de carbono. Como ya lo mencionaron mis compañeros, es importante que tengamos claro inicialmente, antes de tomar decisiones, si es que es aceptable o no esa propuesta que generan las empresas como ya los conocemos, que prácticamente en este momento está arrasando la Amazonía, diferentes empresas que vienen pues a ofrecer el oro prácticamente cuando de fondo no existe nada. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Berlín. Marioldi, tantos años trabajando en este tema, ¿qué recomendaciones le das a otras organizaciones que están trabajando con pueblos indígenas?
Sí, bueno, creo que una principal recomendación tiene que ver con, de verdad, saber escuchar, ¿no? Nuevamente, ¿no? Nosotros también hemos ido aprendiendo mucho sobre la marcha, como mencionó Diana. AIDER empezó los primeros proyectos de apoyo a comunidades nativas en el año 2000. Han pasado ya más de 20 años y en realidad es un proceso constante de aprendizaje, ¿no? Creo que es importante poder priorizar los componentes de capacitación, de sensibilización, pero con un enfoque intercultural, con un enfoque de género en los proyectos para realmente poder lograr este diálogo de saberes, ¿no? Creo que eso es fundamental. Destacaría lo que mencionó Diana también, la importancia de la traducción, no solo traducción, interpretación, que pasa también por poder de repente definitivamente invertir más recursos de los que ya se han invertido en poder formar líderes, promotores indígenas, ¿no? Me parece muy interesante lo que comentó aquí el compañero Levi sobre estos mentores culturales, ¿no? Deben tener mucha experiencia, que podría eso también intercambiarse con países como el nuestro, y además en el caso de nuestra iniciativa también, que estamos embarcados en un programa de formación de promotores de manejo forestal comunitario. Creo que ahí habría mucho para poder intercambiar. Y algo final, que de verdad es una preocupación para todos, mencionó Diana, cómo la falta de información está causando y puede causar más conflictos sociales al interior de las comunidades, pero yo diría que esa falta de información está generando ya conflictos, no solo al interior de las comunidades, sino conflictos entre actores, que en verdad muchos actores, no solo el sector privado, es cierto, ¿no? Hemos sido testigos en Ucayali de cómo empresas de repente han ido con una información no muy clara y han generado tensiones, pero también hemos conocido desde que hemos llegado aquí a la COP de otras iniciativas que vienen incluso desde los mismos gobiernos, ¿no? O sea, son iniciativas públicas y que tampoco, quizás por falta de poder haber sabido explicar más de qué se trata, cuál es el alcance, cómo esos programas van a armonizarse con los planes de desarrollo locales, los planes de vida de los pueblos indígenas. También esa mala información genera conflictos entre diversos actores más allá de solo las comunidades. Entonces creo que hoy más que nunca coincido plenamente que es importante que hayan programas más ambiciosos de poder desarrollar capacidades, pero desde las mismas organizaciones, comunidades, pueblos indígenas, ¿no? Y con una experiencia que, como también ya se mencionó, creo que ya hay, ¿no? No hay que inventar nada nuevo, creo que hay mucha experiencia y recorrido ya de organizaciones que pueden aportar a esto.
Gracias Marioldi. Para terminar, yo no voy a repetir lo que tan claramente nuestros panelistas nos han brindado hoy, sus mensajes, sus conclusiones, pero tal vez yo voy a hacer unas conclusiones de complementarias que he visto en estas conversaciones, de otros beneficios que ha traído la participación de los pueblos indígenas en estas iniciativas Red Más. A través de su participación, algunos líderes de los pueblos indígenas han acumulado experiencia y desarrollado competencias, pero hace falta mucho todavía para mejorar el nivel de los líderes, la cantidad de líderes y también de la base en el territorio, más pueblos indígenas. Los pueblos indígenas también han demostrado que pueden ayudar a diseñar y ejecutar estos mecanismos como Red Más y negociar arreglos beneficiosos con los gobiernos cuando están empoderados y empoderados con competencias. Los gobiernos también deben enfocar esfuerzos en mejorar las capacidades de los pueblos indígenas, pero también de sus funcionarios, para que se den las condiciones para que los pueblos indígenas puedan incidir en la agenda climática y negociar el reconocimiento de su contribución para mitigar el cambio climático dentro de los NDCs. Lo que muchas veces nos concentramos en la participación en estos foros internacionales cuando realmente es a nivel nacional que se concretan las acciones. Y ahí tenemos un trabajo grande que hacer también. Creo que estos mensajes y conclusiones pues, son una guía para todos los que estamos trabajando con los pueblos indígenas, cómo enfocar mejor. He tomado nota y haremos circular y diseminar esta información sobre cuáles son esos temas puntuales donde podemos hacer una mayor incidencia para preparar las condiciones para que los pueblos indígenas puedan participar, para que se eviten conflictos en el territorio, para que sepan cómo responder ante propuestas de diferentes actores que lleguen a sus comunidades. Así que con esto yo quisiera agradecer a nuestros panelistas, a AIDER, a la MPB, a Ecosphere, por acompañar a la Fundación Indígena en esta sesión. Yo les deseo a todos un feliz día y que tengan los mayores de los éxitos en lo que nos resta de la COP. Muchas gracias.
Toma una fotito así, pero que salga todo el púlpito. Así. Ajá. Pero más cerca, Pío. No, aquí nomás esta parte. Sí. Quiero hacer así, mira. O así, ven. ¿Sí? A salir de acá.
Okay, perfect. Is it?
It says PCCB.
Oh, perfect.
And yes, so those two. And the top one is the first one.
Perfect.
And this one will be
Just make
the
sure.
last.
Okay, perfect. I'll tell the ICT team to show the slides here on the screen and on the projector too. Oops.
Good morning, friends and colleagues. We're going to start with the next session momentarily. This session of the PCC Hub is capacity building on effective engagement of different stakeholders, the private sector in NDC implementations, and from experiences from South Asian countries. So thank you very much for joining us. Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us for this event at the Capacity Building Hub. Maybe can I ask the PowerPoint slide on the screen? Okay. Maybe I should start introducing myself. My name is Makoto Kato. A member of Board of Directors, oversees the Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan. We are working on capacity building. And today, especially we are shedding a light on stakeholders' engagement, and in particular the private sector, for the implementation of nationally determined contributions. So we have been engaged in practices on the ground, and we're happy to share experiences, especially from our own activities in Southeast Asian countries. And of course, today, well, we have friends and colleagues outside of Southeast Asian countries. I think it's very exciting for you, and also very exciting for us to share these experiences. And we are also interested in replicating these experiences to other regions. Just talking about the backgrounds. As you know, well, the developing countries' governments are in efforts to address and accelerate the implementation of their nationally determined contributions, NDCs. With recent updates with higher ambitious targets in 2030, together with net zero emission goal as their long-term strategies, there are growing interests to scale up climate actions through engagement of different stakeholders, such as the private sector, local governments, academia, non-government organization, citizens, etc. As the role of the national government may be defined as giving the oversight and facilitate climate actions in respective stakeholders, capacity building of governments to effectively engage stakeholders is crucial. And in turn, capacity building of stakeholders toward the implementation of NDC, together with the national and local governments, that are also important, as their contribution can affect the success of the scenario of mitigation and adaptation efforts. And today, I would like to set the objective of this session is to introduce views and knowledges regarding ways to promote effective stakeholders' engagement in NDC implementation. And through capacity building activities, we are very much willing to scale up and also strengthen the impact of our actions. In this particular session, we would like to invite panelists who are engaged in capacity building practices from governments, bilateral and multilateral development cooperation agencies, and also experts positioned. And also the case studies will be shared from the experience of Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, and maybe other countries as well. So maybe I would like to turn the slide. The next slide, please. Okay. Here, I would like to introduce our fellow colleagues who kindly offered their contribution to participate in this panel. Right next to me is Mr. Dr. Luong Quan Huy, who is from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, Vietnam. And then next to Dr. Hui, I have Kisato Nagakuro. She is working with me in the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan, and she's going to talk to gender perspective of this capacity building stakeholder engagement. And then further is the Scott Willis, my very old and very good friend. And Scott has been working on climate change areas for a long time. And then he has been engaged in development of toolkit under the Paris Committee on Capacity Building, PCCB. And then he's going to walk us through the usefulness of this toolkit. And then maybe we can also extend to discussion to how we can effectively engage stakeholders for strengthened implementation of the nationally determined contributions. The next slide, please. So as the start, I would like to start my own presentation as inception. The next slide, please. So today, I am very happy to share cases from Southeast Asian countries. And then one of the projects here is what we called JICA support for planning and implementation of the nationally determined contribution in Vietnam. In short, we call it SPI NDC in Vietnam. For the detail, maybe Dr. Phui will talk, but I just want to walk you through what we are doing in this project. Following to the previous project, which was implemented at the time of the pre-Paris implementation period, the Vietnamese government has made tremendous efforts to increase the readiness of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. Now, the legislations and also the institutional arrangements, the drastic change has been made within the government. Now, it is a time to accelerate the implementation part of the NDCs. So that this project overall goal is to increase the capacity of the government of Vietnam in planning and implementation of nationally determined contribution. And as a project objectives, we are working to strengthen capacity of MONRE and relevant ministries on development and implementation of commitments on mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions under the nationally determined contribution. And also, policies to enhance participation of the private sector should be developed during the implementation of the NDC through Vietnamese Chamber of Commerce and Industry. So that the first one is more on the policy side. But the second one, of course, on the top of the policy development and the implementation, but the uniqueness of this project is the increasing the engagement of the private sector. So to facilitate for this kind of activities, we have several interesting activities. But if you look at the right-hand bottom side of this PowerPoint, you can see the private sector engagement through the VCCI is a Chamber of Commerce. And we are working on capacity building and training or cooperate. And also we are trying to support the incentives introduction for the facilitation of their participations. And also, I think it's a gradual change that we have seen that for the perception of the private sector. I think they're quite motivated thanks to the very proactive role played by the Vietnamese government. So we are very happy to see very exciting moments that now companies are quite willing to increase their actions. So that the facilitation of those actions is one of the keys to our activities. The next slide, please. So that I think the detail and also the good stories are coming from Dr. Phui from Vietnam. So that I am going to take up another project. Instead of digging into the Vietnamese project here. So the next project, we're engaged in the capacity development of the local government, which is Bangkok, Thailand. We have been engaged in working with the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, or BMA, in development of the Bangkok Master Plan on Climate Change, which involves the 4 different mitigation sectors and one key sector, areas work as adaptations. And we have been already completing the 3rd phase of these actions. And then While the start of this project was very small, but now it has been increased to a very large type of activities, including for the emission reduction targets in 2030 and 2050 as net zero emissions ambitions. The next slide, please. So just to let you know, the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration has been very successful in achieving 2020 target, which is in line with nationally appropriate mitigation actions, NAMAs. It is amazing that Bangkok has shared the almost 70%, 70 to 18% of the national emissions, so that it's a very gigantic city in Thailand. So that if Bangkok is successful in reducing greenhouse gases, then also the national government has been very successful. And then we have targeted for the 2020 years target, basically minus 13.57% against the business as usual scenario. But in actual case, we're very successful. I mean, Bangkok is very successful in reducing almost like a 24% against the business as usual. And in some sectors, such as transport, they are actually they have reduced greenhouse gas emissions, even the absolute emissions baseline of 2013. So that I think a drastic change has been started in Bangkok. The next slide, please. And what we are also promoting is that for the net zero emission in 2050, traditionally, the local governments, such as Thailand, they're not really good at working with the private sector. So that what they did have been working in more like giving a regulation type things, so that maybe and in most the leadership was taken by the environmental sectors, so that usually like environmental departments, environmental ministries, traditionally their work modality is giving like a regulations, command and control things. However, it may be useful to take another step to be more like a promotional approach. What you see on the screen is that Mr. Chachat he's a new governor of the Bangkok Metropolitan Administration, working with the JICA, and he's a minister from the Japanese embassy. And now he has been promoting their activities with private sector, so that this is quite a new thing. To be honest, Bangkok was not really good at working with the private sector before, but nowadays, big companies, small companies, they're joining with the new governors. And then our approach is to support that kind of activities. The next slide, please. So approach, here, very important slide. Approach we have defined. This is actually what we defined in the preparation of the JICA SPI NDC project in Vietnam. This is a famous diagram. If you look at the left hand side bottom line, we usually do training for the individual officers or individual experts. But to scale up this impact, we need to actually assimilate this capacity at the organizational level. So that if we are working with government officials, then it needs to be in the ministry level or department level. But now what we are further enhancing is that the society and systemic level, so that what we are trying to support is that the capacity of, for example, a capacity of the government to facilitate private sector's efforts toward climate change actions. The next slide, please. The next one, please. And then also another important thing, if you look at the left-hand side, usually what we say like a capacity of how do we work with the capacity building, capacity development. And then if you look at the left-hand side, there are existing capacities already, but the red square is more like you're trying to fill you're trying to fill the gap with the external capital transfer or knowledge transfer. But can you hit the button, please? The next slide, please. We don't think this is sustainable, because I think if the external capital left, then the gap still comes up. So what we're trying to do is the right-hand side, existing capacity, this is a very important. Vietnam has already a very good foundation of capacity. Thailand has a very good foundation of capacity. But what we're trying to do is to enhance this existing capacity by for example, lifting this existing capacity up, and then by external inputs such as knowledge sharing, also sometimes for like capital transfer. But the next slide, please. Yes, we believe this is more sustainable. So I think this also applies to the actions to engage stakeholders. So there are already existing resources in our partner countries, and they have knowledge. But the question is how we are going to enhance, how we are going to promote their actions. The next slide, please. So here's guiding questions for you to engage in discussion later. But what are effective ways to engage stakeholders again? I know everybody says stakeholder engagement is important. Yes, but what are effective ways? And are there any good entry points? So sometimes it's not easy. Well, if we are talking to the private sector people, they are speaking in different languages. If you're talking to NGO people, they're talking to different languages. But we need their support, we need their participation. So how can we find good entry points to start working with them? And the third one is how do you manage for entry success for durable partnership? So maybe in the entry part, we can start, we can make a good start. But we need to maintain the partnership with them. So how can we do this? So this is another thing we would like to discuss with you. So far, this is the sort of like an inception type of our discussion. So then I would like to start inviting my colleagues, and maybe Dr. Fui, can I ask you to start your story?
Thank you very much, Gato. And ladies and gentlemen, my name is Hui. I'm working for Department of Climate Change under the Vietnam Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. And we've been working in this field for quite a long time already, also with the Japanese colleagues. And there's quite a number of activities in terms of capacity building for on climate change in general, and especially in the recent years for our quest to fulfill the commitment to the UNFCCC that we've been doing in Vietnam. First of all, is that the climate change issue has been in Vietnam for quite a while already, but the capacity building that needs to be done, first of all, top down for the government level, And many development partners, including Japan, have been helping us with the technical assistance for the lime industry, especially for our Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, to develop from our laws and our bylaws, documents, and so on. And the capacity building, the program's been developed for different sectors, especially those high energy consuming sectors, such as the energy or transport or other sectors that we need to include in our quest to reduce GHG emission in Vietnam. But since the Paris, I think COP21 in Paris, one of the very important role of the private sector appears to be the highest priority for our capacity building efforts. So there are only about less than 7% of the companies in Vietnam are multinational companies who already have the capacity in terms of the GHG emission reduction, in terms of green growth, in terms of sustainable development, because they have been doing that in many other countries and they have the experience. But that kind of experience has not been spread out to other countries, to other companies, which accounts for about 96.7% in Vietnam. And currently in Vietnam, we have about roughly 1 million companies that needs to be improved in terms of their capacity. So in the past few years, the government of Vietnam has been trying to develop a capacity building program for all of those sectors. And the way we approach is that we work with development partners like JICA or others to develop tailor-made programs, starting with the technical aspect that support the companies and the private sector to fulfill, first of all, the legal requirements for them to do, for example, their GHG inventory, or they develop their own action plan to reduce GHG emission. So we divided them into different sectors like energy and agriculture, forestry and waste and transport and so on. And all those sectors been under management by different line ministries in Vietnam. So there's a link between the government and the private sector that we do. And we also had the support from what we call the VCCI, the Vietnam Chamber for Commerce and Industry, which is the hub for us to go through, from the government to go through to VCCI to work with private sector. And alongside with that, we have many business associations, for example, Steel Association or Cement Association, Textile Association, and so on. So they are those people who are willing to connect the companies with the government and with the VCCI, which is, again, Vietnam Chamber for Commerce and Industry, and with the development partners. And we started with those who got a higher or potential to reduce GHG emission, for example, the energy or transport, and also the building sector as well. So those are the people who can spread out the knowledge and the experience to other sectors. And we think that, well, that is probably the appropriate approach for Vietnam to do. And in the past few years, the project that Makato mentioned, what we call SPI NDC, meaning strengthening the planning and implementation of our NDC. And our NDC, as you know, that well, since COP26, most countries have updated their NDC, including ours. So the target has been much higher, from 27 for last year, coming up to 43.5% this year that we just have updated and submitted to UNFCCC a few days ago. And so that means there's a lot more pressure on private sector, which they need to improve their capacity quicker and in more effective way, and have to put that in action immediately. And our law on environmental protection, which include the provision for GHG emission reduction, requires a company to start their GHG emission reduction by 2025. So that means we don't have that much time left until that, well, we need to provide the private sector with the sufficient knowledge and capacity to fulfill their requirements from legal documents, and also to support them with the the technical aspect to reduce their GHG emission in their operation. And another very important aspect that we always ask about is finance. Excuse me. And currently, that while we have a lot of opportunities for green finance, and the banking system in Vietnam is very much willing to provide preferential loans to companies, but the most important thing is that they need to understand why they need to invest into the green finance and in order to reduce. So that's something that, while the government of Vietnam, and especially the Ministry of Finance and our ministry, has been working with development partners and the banking system in Vietnam. Not only the Vietnamese banks, but also international banks been coming to Vietnam to help us with how to mobilize that. We realize that the tons and tons of money out there within the private sector, within the community, that needs to be invested in the right way and to make the profit for the company, while doing all those changing or transition into achieving the net zero commitment that we have. And that's going to be a long shot, but we take it from as a roadmap from now to 2050, starting with from now to 2030, which is our NDC. And in our NDC, that we identify quite a number of activities that highly potential for the sectors, which will be implemented by the companies, and those activities will be supported financially and politically as well to the company, in order for them to implement it in a way that benefit their business plan as well. So capacity building is not only about all the technical aspect, but also to make them understand what's in it for them, and what would be their responsibility to the government and to the community and also to society. And many companies, from large and medium companies, they already have what they call a corporate, you already know, a corporate social responsibility, a CSR. And in Vietnam, that we're working with the Vietnam Chamber for Commerce Industry, we developed the CSI, which is the corporate sustainability index. And that, in a way, is to quantify their efforts and towards any kind of activities they do in environmental protection, and now in GHG emission reduction and in climate change response in general. So those are and with that they would be awarded on annual basis, and that would help very much with their competitiveness in the market. And so the company are very much interested in it. And in a way that is not only about capacity building, but also the incentive for the companies to work with the government and other technical assistance agency to improve their awareness and also actions in all kinds of sustainable development activities. So those are currently, we know there's still a long way to go. And with a few priority things that we're going to do in the next few years, especially from now to 2025, before the companies got to start their activities to reduce GHG emission. First of all, is to make them understand what they need to do and what's in it for them in the quest to reduce GHG emission and to achieve the net zero target. Secondly, is to improve the linkage between the government and the private sector, because that's the only way to do it. Because seeing we developing countries, and before 2020, mostly the climate change activities are done by the government and not much by the private sector. And now that role is shifting to the private sector very much, and because it requires a lot of money, a lot of financing coming from private sector, and that is the way that the government can't really cover all of it. So it has to be mobilized from the private sector. And the third thing is that we need to link them with the international market in a way that, well, to get them to blend in the international market better. And one of the examples is that the CBAM mechanism that would affect them very much. And that's something we need them to understand and to improve their operation and business plan to respond to all kinds of mechanisms that may affect their business activities in the future. So that a little bit of my story in Vietnam for you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hui. it's been really amazing that the Vietnamese government, actually his office, has actually transformed into something really interesting. And also he is transforming, his office is transforming the community of climate community in Vietnam. Not only public one, not anymore, but also like private sector has actively working with his office. And now a very big partner called VCCI, Vietnam Chamber of Commerce and Industry. They are backing up the government's efforts in many ways. So I think this is a good example for us to follow, maybe. Okay, next I would like to invite Ms. Kisato Nagakuro, because the stakeholder engagement is not only about government, private sector, but also we need to consider, we want to consider the gender perspective. So she's going to speak to gender perspective, engagement of women, those kind of themes. So Nagakuro-san, can I have you?
Okay, thank you, Kato-san. Good morning, distinguished participants, friends, and colleagues. I'm Kisato Nagakuro from Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, Japan. Today, I'm talking about a gender-focused case study in the effective engagement of the private sector in achieving NDCs, and why women need to be at the center of the climate change action. In various international conferences on climate action, the results of surveys and findings on women's involvement have been reported so far. Empirical analysis has shown that highlight the participation rate of women, the higher the performance in taking the climate change actions. And also confirming that women's activities are key to promoting a decarbonized society. Women's leadership in business is associated with a greater transparency on climate change. And a positive correlation is reported between the percentage of women on boards and disclosure of carbon or GHG emissions. The positive correlation of environmental disclosure is particularly pronounced in companies where women officers comprise more than 30% of the board of directors. I have about 6 years experiences worked in secondary education institutions. During one of those experiences, when I had a group discussion on the center topic of the lesson learning processes, there was a clear difference in the number and variety of opinions between the same gender only group and mixed gender group. The mixed gender group presented a greater variety of the opinions. Translating this case to the companies, it can be said that the engagement with women is essential in order for diversity to presume decision-making and judgment. Diversity in companies is especially beneficial from the risk management perspective. Let me provide the two examples. First, a Japanese company was criticized by consumers because the company's advertisement contained languages that were not undesirable to women or gender bias. That could have been easily disconfirming from a woman's point of view. If decisions have made with the woman's input of view or women's input in judgment, they could have been noticed earlier before the publication or advertisement were released to the public. In another companies, the progress of efforts in non-financial areas such as intellectual, human, social relations, nature, environmental, etc., including promoting of women's activities, lead to the increase to employee commitment, involvement in satisfaction and motivation, and disclosure of corporate information, including GHG emission. The ripple effect of these efforts can be seen in increased corporate sales, reduced labor costs, and enhanced risk management through acquisition of ESG, namely environmental, social, and governance investment. And that increased corporate value. A diverse board of directors can manage risk from a variety of perspectives. Creating economic value such as ESG investment or corporate value improvement and implementing MRV at the facility level is essential for non-state actors' climate change action. When private companies engage in and disclose information on both decarbonization and women's activities, they will receive the recognition they deserve and will be able to raise more funds, leading to higher corporate value and sustainable growth of their companies. Furthermore, it will enable companies to address decarbonization from a variety of perspectives, and incorporating a gender perspective will help the address a wide variety of issues. Okay. In addition, the transition away from the fossil fuel economy has been accelerating in recent years. This can also be expected to have a ripple effect on economic and employment opportunities in developing countries. It will create new jobs for businesses and provide opportunities for women workers to acquire new skills. This growing momentum to create economic value could accelerate emission disclosure by the private sector. By bringing women at the center of the climate change action, together with men, we can expect more effective engagement of the private sectors through increased corporate value or related ESG investment. In turn, this will contribute to a steadier implementation of climate action, including NDCs. That's my conclusion. But gender equality and women's empowerment in the climate change and environmental sector must be further developed and are linked to concrete action in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nagakura-san, for your very useful contribution, especially from the gender perspective. Now, I would like to invite my friend Scott Willis, who actually has been engaged in the climate actions, including capacity building, and also, in particular here, the development of the PCCB toolkit. So, Scott, can I have your presentation? So, can I have the presentation on the screen, please?
Thanks, Makoto-san. It's nice to be up here with you today. If I could just offer a couple of brief reflections on the remarks we just heard. I mean, I think I fully align myself with Ms. Gazato's remarks. I mean, anyone who's spent any time in the climate change space knows that the sort of early and frequent engagement of women is absolutely fundamental to success in any sort of engagement we're going to undertake. And designing these processes with women at the center from the very beginning is very important. Dr. Quang Huy, it was also very interesting to, I know that Vietnam's worked very closely with the Overseas Environmental Cooperation Center, certainly for the duration of time that Makoto and I have been friends, which dates back nearly 20 years to the capacity building process here at the UNFCCC. But it was also interesting to learn about the work that the Vietnam Chamber of Commerce has undertaken in this regard. Speaking from my experience as a former director of the Environment and Natural Resource Division at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the programs that you were describing put anything that we can sort of offer from a Canadian perspective to shame. So it was really it was quite interesting to learn a little bit more about that. And Makoto, if you needed a headshot, I could have given you one. But I suppose we can address that for next time. Okay, turning to the capacity building toolkit from the PCCB. The mandate from the process was for the PCCB to produce a toolkit to assess needs and gaps at national level to support national officials' engagement in the Paris Agreement process. If you could, next slide, please. Essentially, it contains a series of tools and methodologies, and this presentation, I believe, is available on the PCCB website, and if it isn't now, it will be soon. But essentially, what we endeavored to do was to build something that could be evergreen. And by that I mean the report itself is probably 50 pages, features a handful of case studies from various geographic regions and different sectors of economic activity. But the most important thing is that it's because it's modular, it's designed to be able to be built out so that as additional capacities become apparent, and I think of sort of the transparency requirements under the BTR and the sort of the fundamental nature of how important transparency is to this process. These things can be added on and approached in the same manner. Next slide, please. Okay, so essentially, in undertaking the research to identify what the best approach to capacity assessment was, I drew heavily on, there was a lot of research that had been undertaken, but also a series of publications, predominantly by UNDP and IUCN, going back about 10 years. But the approach that they presented was sound. Fundamentally, it breaks it into a approximately 5 or 6 stage process. This first stage, inception, really does consist of identifying what the objectives and expectations are, who the key stakeholders are, identify a methodology that can be adapted to local needs, determine what our data needs are going to be and what the scope of those things should be, and then how the assessment will be carried out, and then to essentially initiate the assessment. So that brings us into phase 2. We take stock of existing skills and capacities, and building on the point that Makoto raised, these are not just at the institutional level or at the national level, but at the individual level as well. And one of the principles that really is fundamental to this, again, anyone who's worked in the space would know, it isn't just about capacity building, but also about capacity retention and institutional strengthening, and ensuring that these things are done in-house, in-country, within ministries, and identifying those key skills from across the full scope of what implementation of the Paris Agreement is going to require. When we started down this path with the UNFCCC 30 years ago, I don't think there was full appreciation for the scale of the sort of economic and societal transformation that we are undertaking. And the more we learn, the more we realize how broad how many sort of aspects of society need to be engaged, and the way that we need to raise the public consciousness about the scale of the climate challenge and how we all have a role to play. So it's interesting to not just sort of get the sort of societal awareness of this, but again to retain it and to build on it and to ensure that we're learning from each other as we go. When we move on to phase 3, essentially we're summarizing and interpreting results, validating the findings, and preparing an assessment report. And something that Makoto spoke to earlier in terms of stakeholder engagement. Stakeholder engagement is fundamental at every stage of this process. Proper identification of stakeholders, but then ensuring that we're going back and we're signal checking with stakeholders to make sure that this is, in fact, we are looking to measure the right things, we're looking to measure the right data, do we have the right systems in place, do we have the right skills, are we asking the right questions, and then validating these findings with stakeholders as we go. So the fourth stage would be essentially developing an action plan to address those identified capacity needs and gaps, to identify resources that can support these actions that need to be undertaken, and then to go ahead and implement the plan. And then again, we find ourselves monitoring and evaluating what those gaps themselves are. And then it feeds back, because this is a process that it is iterative and it does take time. It is an incredibly lengthy process, it's incredibly involved, and there are various methodologies available in terms of the approaches that can be considered. But fundamentally, the idea of it isn't so much a capacity assessment process as a capacity assessment cycle. Now, what the PCCB has done, and all of this information is available through the PCCB portal, is they've built an IT-based version, essentially, of this capacity assessment. And the idea in trying to make it evergreen is simply so that as we identify new learnings, they can all be sort of factored into this cycle, so that the work of the PCCB remains relevant to the needs of its constituents, which is to say national officials. It targets primarily national officials engaged in the capacity building process. But as we identify new needs and as these things evolve, we're able to keep this process updated. In the interest of time and to leave some time for discussion, I will leave it there. But very happy to share the work of the PCCB with you this afternoon, and happy to discuss. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Scott, for walking us through the very important work of the PCCB. And well, the toolkit has been quite. I would say, I think it's a breakthrough for the committee and also the parties. We can use for this toolkit as a well, of course, tool which is very important for the government to start off like a strategizing their capacity building approach, especially in the context of the NDCs. Thank you very much, Scott, for this. Okay, then would you also add something? No? Does it? Okay. Okay, so I think we have something around 10 minutes to have for discussion. And maybe if there are any questions or comments from the floor, I would like to invite questions from the floor. So are there anyone who wants to raise questions? Yes, and could you come here? Oh, okay, there's a microphone. So that could you identify yourself first?
Hello, my name's Abby. I'm from America. My question may go to Ms. Nagakuro or Mr. Kato as well. But I liked the presentation. I thought it was very fascinating and interesting and encouraging. But in respects to gender, I do see improvement in in Japan of gender increase. However, I still think it's a very low percentage compared to other countries. And my question is, what pressure is Japanese government putting on stakeholders to encourage women to, especially Japanese women, to take higher positions and be able to take sabbaticals if they want children and not to be demoted to just office flowers? So what is the pressure that the Japanese government is using?
Very good question. I like that question, actually. Okay, maybe if there are another question, then we can respond. Okay, thank you very much. We'll keep that question. Okay, are there any other people who want to raise questions? Okay, so well, there's another one here.
Okay. Good morning, chairs. I'm Dr. Ali Musa Yauri. I'm from the Department of Climate Change, Federal Ministry of Environment, as the designated national authority in my country. And my country happened to pass the National Action Plan for Gender in the country, and the problem we are facing presently is the implementation of the activities identified in the National Action Plan. This also come to happen that we have a different ethnic groups, about or more than 200 ethnic groups in Nigeria, and so we find it difficult to coordinate the implementation, especially when we go into a religion as a factor. So I don't know how you can advise us on going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, sharing for the, okay, there's another one, maybe? So, gentlemen, yeah, can I
Thank you very much. My name is Ibrahim Haruna. I'm the Director of Media, Federal Ministry of Environment, Abuja, Nigeria. My question is about this climate change. We have a physically challenged or disabled people who are co-opted into the National Council of Climate Change. So I don't know what effort this organization is doing to collaborate with Nigeria and assist us in the area of helping the disabled people, most especially dwelling disasters like flooding, desertification, and other issues, and women and children during the natural disasters. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. We have nice 3 comments, question and comments also. Maybe Kisato-san, do you want to start?
Okay, let me start. Thank you very much for your wonderful question. Okay, according to your question, the Japan government actually implements some pressures to big companies. However, I'd like to focus on the pressure not only from government perspectives, but also the financial perspectives. In the corporation integrated report or SCR reports, it is the very expectable effect, for the engagement by private sectors regarding the women's engagement or empowerment. So not only government perspective, but also the financial perspective. I mean the investment or consumers. the most important thing by private sector is corporate value. Corporate value. So if they trying to increase the corporate value, they have to disclose not only GHG information, I mean the environmental information, but also the women's information. How percentage are there in your companies, men and women? If they are not disclose any information regarding women, that's nearly equal to doing nothing about women's engagement. So I'd like to emphasize disclosure. Information disclosure is the most important things. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think because I like this question, I would like to build up on. Well, our efforts is not enough, probably. I have to acknowledge, and I really want to see more colleagues, men, women. One thing, I just asked Kisato to come up here. We want to also increase the women power in our office. So this is my humble strategy. But it needs to be strategic. It needs to be systemic. So I think we need your advice. I think, and we want to move, more positive side on this way. Yeah. And coming back to the questions about my Nigerian colleagues. Our organization is working with international agencies, also Japanese government agencies, and with Nigeria and African countries. Well, we have been engaged in sort of like a group training of officers or stakeholders. Basically, we're inviting them to Japan as the first stage. Then after that, some of my colleagues, not in Nigeria but other countries, they are very successful in giving a request for enlarged proposals for technical cooperation projects, as, for example, Dr. Hui mentioned. So that this is actually how we are going to start the activities, in-country activities. So that if you're interested, maybe we would like to circulate the opportunity for us to start off that kind of engagement together. Yeah, and I think the natural disaster and also climate change adaptation. This is our important focus, including in African countries. Yes. Okay. Scott, do you want to say something? No? Okay.
On anything in particular?
If you don't have, it's okay. But for the women's engagement, for example, you said
Sure. I mean, the one thing about the toolkit is it was also designed to be set up to address cross-cutting issues such as gender as well. And there's a particular case study on gender from the toolkit. I mean, consistently, and not just based on the work that I've done, the work that went into preparing the toolkit, but certainly when I've been involved both in development cooperation projects, but also even just in working bilaterally, either through negotiations or with investment facilities. I mean, the teams that have active women participation are simply they're better prepared. You tend to get a more robust perspective. The thinking that has gone into the positions that are being adopted are consistently more effective. They're more thorough, and they tend to lead to better outcomes. Again, I don't think this is news, but it is, and I was interested with Ms. Gazato's the data that she was presenting, but certainly that's borne out based on the 20 years that I've been doing international climate change policy, and it's incredibly clear, it's incredibly important, and we can't. We're not doing enough of it, and we can't do it fast enough. In terms of capacity building and capacity retention. it needs to start with women. It's just it's the most effective way to ensure value for investment and to ensure outcomes that have an opportunity to be Paris aligned.
Thank you very much. Well, that's a very valuable comment for we want to learn from, and that we want to put it in practice. Okay. Now time is up, so that I would like to wrap this up. But thank you so much for sharing time with us. And I think the capacity building, including the enhancement, engagement of multi-stakeholders, the different stakeholders. Well, this is our crucial approach to strengthen our implementation of nationally determined contribution. So I think this is a good start for us to communicating with each other. So please keep contact with us, and then let's continue to work together. So thank you very much for your participation. Thank you.